Hello, hello. This is Irene with SaugaTalks. I do need ask everyone, all right? If you're not subscribed yet, subscribe on YouTube. You know what it means. You know what every like means. You know what every comment means, okay? More people will see the talks because guess what? I am talking with fascinating people in tech. And that means I want to share this wisdom, right? Not for my own sake, not for my own self-esteem, okay? I have enough going on of that one, but I do want really more people to realize how wonderful the technology universe is, and how many different characters, many different backgrounds, and many different perspectives in life even meet in that universe. So to me, it's incredibly rewarding to see that you like what we say. You share with your colleagues, you share with your audiences out there, right? So find SaugaTalks on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, little less so, but still Facebook, right? LinkedIn, of course, right? And just let us know what topics on your mind, right? What are you struggling with or what are you inspired by? I'm sure we'll have wonderful guest speakers who are so incredibly generous with their time to join me every week here. And today I'm extremely privileged. Doug Shannon is here. Hi, Doug. How are you?
Hey, I'm doing well. I'm glad to be here. Thanks.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you so much. Because we're going to touch on some of the mouthful terms that people throw left and right and left. Okay. And frankly, I get confused sometimes. And I spent many years, in this, right? And still,
Yeah.
just give some example, right? BPM, RPA, digital maturity, digitalization, digital transformation, AI, automation, hyper automation. You see, I can go on and on. You
Oh
can
yeah.
go on and on, right?
Yeah.
So let's have a human conversation, right? Let's start somewhere. Digital maturity, okay? 2022. Let's talk about that a little bit.
Sure. Yeah. So I mean, digital maturity is basically where everything's moving to. Like we've been in the computer age. We've already finished the industrial age. Like things are more fluid now than they've ever been. We all have cell phones. And we've had them for years now, but like everything's becoming more and more integrated. And so when things become more integrated, then we have to have more ways of those things to talk to one another. And so trying to use like, normalized terms and whatnot, but like your IoT devices, for example, like your Internet of Things, or just like that would be like a cell phone. That would be like the fact that your cell phone now can turn on your coffee maker, you can look inside of your refrigerator, depending on which one you buy, and see, do you need to purchase milk, at the store when you go to it, because you can see inside of it. So things like that. But digital maturity, in the sense of enterprise maturity or company and your organizational maturity, that's where things are getting more interesting, right? So we're looking, everybody's looking to drive that, and how do you drive that is really the question everybody's asking. And so one of the articles that you were speaking to was something that Harvard Business Review put out, and the way they kind of formulated what they were talking about was just like the basics of understanding like the basic business stuff. It's like, what's their traditional business standpoint of, how do you break down those silos that every company has? What's the how do you bridge into that with some of those agile teams and agile methodology? So basically, agile being a way to produce iterative value over time versus these large big bang projects that we've seen time and time again. So from there you can look at like insights and just like how do you use your data, and how are you really taking the data from your company and taking action on that, right? So what does it look like, and can you keep it going, which is a matter of like when you talk about BPM, like business process management, that's where that comes in. It's how do you manage that data to a point where it's clean data, your users, your business users, they all understand what it is, they understand their processes better because they're really documenting those processes. So overall, that's the basic understanding of what we're looking at with digital maturity. It's a matter of like, let's use culture, let's use the people and help them learn how to do it better and how to document their processes, so that those documented processes could literally be enablers or enabled to help the digital transformation of a company or an organization, or even just your team.
let's define some terms here, because we've seen the articles. Okay, there are a bunch of resources. We all kind of feel overwhelmed even
Yeah.
by. Okay, I loved your post in on LinkedIn not long ago, right? About stages of digital maturity. That post is by Harvard Business Review. Very respectful, very resourceful. So what I loved about it, and I'll share this, of course, link directly, but the notion of moving from traditional digital maturity to bridge, to hub, to platform, and going native. How do you see organizations actually situate themselves in this? Mhm.
Yeah, so that's actually, so you would start with the basics, right? So again, talking about business process management, your users, your employees, you're going to ask them, hey, let's start somewhere, right? So where do you start? And you start with really documenting those processes. From documenting the processes down, then you can kind of look at what processes are our priorities, what are our major points, where are things moving, what are our major processes, and that we can look at overall to understand, can any of that be automated. And so then you pull in different factors like RPA being robotic process automation. So it's like the first level of automation basically. So it can come in and you can have a team or a COE, like a center of excellence, like just people that know how to automate, and using automation platforms to take those business process maps, those BPMs, to automate some functionality of there or automate the whole thing, right? So the more you automate, the more time that gives back to your employees. So not only are your employees writing these processes because they're like, hey, I do this thing every day anyway, or hey, we have these seasonal workers that come in, or we have these people that only know this functionality, and then how do we share that if something were to happen or someone gets sick, then documenting that's going to be great, which then comes into, can we automate some of that? And then when you automate it, what you're doing is, again, like you're giving that time back. That team is now gaining hours saved, and that gives them the ability to innovate and go, hey, what other processes are out there, or can we reevaluate this existing automation and do it better, or can we do more automation? So from RPA, you start to look into, like, intelligent automation, and that's when you start to really kind of dive into how do you, well, actually you actually go into regular automation, but either way, so you want to figure out where your pain points are. You're going to use things like process mining is something a lot of people use, and there's a lot of different vendors out there that have it. And what it does is it gives you insights into your data. It gives you the ability to look at that democratized kind of stability and say, hey, where are the pain points? Where are our goals? Work with your stakeholders, work with your leadership, and say, where do we need to be more effective and where do we need to be more efficient so that we can be more impactful and more purposeful in what we do. And so with that, it's just a matter of like gathering the details, understanding the overall viewpoint of the company, and then driving those goals forward, right? So that's overall automation, and then you can get into the more like intelligent automation. You can get into intelligent business process mapping. One thing that the Harvard Business Review article really didn't touch on, which was fantastic, was they didn't talk about hyperautomation. You hear a lot of that in the communities and out there. And hyperautomation is, I tend to look at it more as a hyper scaling. So hyperautomation usually talks about, and you have like Gartner and some of these other people talking about it. And in general, it's a neat idea. It's not something that you're going to like keep doing. It's not going to be like a standpoint. Like you got there, and then all of a sudden you're an amazing person and team because you got the hyperautomation and you're now doing this great thing. It's a matter of like you may hit that and you may see hyper scaling, and you may see that you're doing really well in the organization and really knocking it out and then automating more and more and getting that ROI, that return on investment on what you've really invested in, and what those processes are really handling. But when it comes down to it, you know you're going to peak and ebb and flow in some of that hyper automation, hyper scaling. So you may scale really fast and then you find out, oh hey, we're good where we are right now, and then you don't need as many bots, or you need to purchase more bots or licenses to run these automations. So that's kind of where that kind of moves up and down a little bit. So I don't see that as a standard, and I liked it how looking at digital maturity, it doesn't really talk about it, but it does talk about how to get to those points of where you can get there, and then from past that, it's how you get to artificial intelligence, right? So artificial intelligence, like you asked, was, how do we get there? And the way we get there is we build up the documentation, understand the processes. From understanding the processes, you can automate those processes, and from automating, then you're basically streamlining the input from process to automation. So that data is now basically live and living data that can then be passed into like data sources, or um, another another form of name to call them is like a source of truth, right? So your main database that has all of your data, and a lot of it, and you have to make sure it's good data. So data that goes in, you keep it clean, keep it good, make sure you have standards and governance to keep it that way. And at which point, then once you have all the data in there, you can actually take action on it. And those actions can be done in the form of either intelligent automation, or just artificial intelligence can then take that data and actually run analytics and run test simulations and build the forms and the model ops and everything that you need, and the training data you need to ensure that it's going to maintain itself. Because if you don't, then you basically end up with like Power BI, that you're building databases, you're building these dashboards, and then you don't have the data that comes in. So every month you have to go pull that same data sources yourself, type it all up, format it, and then put it in there to get the new dashboard. So instead of having the human do all that, why don't we have the automation really handle that lift and shift? What is the goal to get the AI there?
Business process management, optimizing companies' operations, this is not new concepts, okay?
No.
They are, 20, 15 years old, 10 years of really, right, wide adoption. What this year brings to the table, because I know, right, AI going mainstream, and yet we still see a lot of projects, right, lots of projects failing. We see adoption challenges, right? So
Yeah.
what's your experience, and how fast AI will be adopted this year?
Yeah, so like in 2022, right? So AI is a hot topic, and automation is a hot topic as well. But AI, the things that I'm seeing and the teams that I've been working with, and kind of on the side talking to, a lot of times the AI doesn't do any automation, at least from the automation sense of like using RPA and some of that. What it's doing is they're building the training data. So they basically take the data and say, hey, let's build a training model. Out of that training model, let's go do the regressions and do the polls and make sure we can actually literally put the data out there to run items against it. And then over time it works, but then over time you start to see a variance come in, and they get a little bit more spread, and then the data doesn't quite match the test data or the training data anymore. And the issue there is because, like, again, back in the beginning, if you don't have those processes documented and those processes being input correctly, or where it's driving the data forward to give and serve up to the AI, it's not going to have accurate data every time. And when you automate that, you're basically QAing that from the start. You're building quality into your data, because you're not going to have the ability of us, myself typing in something wrong, or doing something that maybe I'm not following the process, that there is a process. And humans, we tend to kind of go our own way or carve our own path. This is the reason why you see a large square grass field, but you see like a line cut right down the middle of everybody walking down that cross street. So like they cut the path because it's a shorter path, right? So this way you keep that data very strong, and you keep it very static to where it can be changed because of the processes, and because those variables that have already been discussed are now being pushed along to the AI. So yeah, I think overall that's where things are going. That's why we see some other things around AI not always working out. The other thing to just bring up is I usually talk about the culture of it all, right? So your company culture, your team culture, a lot of things, we all see different projects, and sometimes they fail, and sometimes they fail because of culture, because of the company, or because of the team, or because of the organization. And the reasons why, it goes back to understanding sometimes like the agile methodology, understanding the data analytics side, the democratization, data driven mechanics of like how to take your data from one store or one location to another and keep it very accurate, right? So culturally, And the reason why I bring that up on the automation side and towards the AI side is because culturally, if you're trying to make a change in your company's culture or your organization's culture, it's much easier. What I found, at least, it's much easier to do with automation. So with automation, you're teaching users and upskilling them to know here's why documenting this process makes sense. And by documenting it, I can then get it automated. And by automating it, I'm now taking the stress out of my life. And by taking the stress out of my life of doing these reports every week and month, I'm now happier and I'm going to look for other things and innovate to help drive that forward. And then I'm going to tell my friends about it and they're going to drive that forward. And overall, everybody kind of wins because they're saving time. And it's really what we want. At the end of the day, we want to have meaningful work and not be stuck doing something we know how to do but we don't want to do, right? So we're trying to mitigate those mundane tasks and those stressful tasks out of the way so that people can have more meaningful work.
For sure, for sure. Yeah. So any examples? I mean, any like inspiring examples when solution automation solution, right? As small or as big, because we know, right? Companies start with small projects, right? You got to start somewhere, maybe less mission critical, right? Before you have ambitious goals out there. So any examples that, we can share out there just to illustrate.
I mean, there's tons of examples, right? I mean, everybody's automated from anything from how invoices work to how emails and everything. So the biggest thing about automation that's neat is the fact that it's going to mimic whatever a human could do. So if I can log in and I'm on a computer and I want to go grab some Excel work document or any other kind of stuff from a database and then pull that information in, churn some of that, do some conditional formatting, and then send that out and email that to people. So can a bot, so can a bot process, so can that automation. All of that can be done. And then that all serves up another function and purpose. But where does it start at? The easy place to start is always like, a lot of people say like the low hanging fruit, but what does that mean? That means basically like this simple, very simple task. Like, so you want a POC, like a proof of concept, and then you want to take that proof of concept, you want to kind of grow that and say, okay, we did this one function really well, we see that it works, it's solid, let's build like an MVP, like a minimal viable product of that, and then show really what this automation can do and handle and work for more teams. Like say if you have one team that has one thing that they're like, hey, this is a pain point of ours, can we really automate this? Great, now let's automate it. You get it automated, then you find out it's not just that team, it's 30 other teams need this same kind of functionality. Well, then let's go work at those and then get those teams enabled so that you can just recreate. And the best thing about automation is not just a bunch of code tossed in, hundreds of lines of code. It's coding, but it's object coding. It's where you can kind of see where it's going. There's frameworks and if then else statements and try statements so that you can actually see what's happening. You can build in variables very easily, and you can also build in assets in some regards, depending what platform you're using. And these assets can be used to say, hey, if you're going to google.com today, but tomorrow you want to go to bing.com, it's like 3 clicks, and then you can make the change and everything's fine. The bot or the process will run just fine by changing that asset. So things like that, and then the fact that it's very auditable is why automation and RPA and all that works very well, because you can see the changes, you can see the change tables, you can see what was changed at any given time, and a lot of that's not really built into the AI sense yet. That all has to be kind of programmed in. So if you use the automation side ahead of it, you get a lot of that, like again, quality checks and a lot of the really good work to be done ahead of time.
Can we jump into a little more technical kind of segment of this talk? Because I want to know what's the coolest automation technology out there. Because some of us thinking it's just chatbot, okay, and they of course maturing and evolving, right? Could you shed some light in a way that how old good BPM is evolving and what's next for automation?
Yeah, some of the quick things for automation that's coming up and a lot of more vendors are doing is that classic BPM of writing those scripts and writing the overall process. That's now moving into where it's intelligent. And so some of those intelligent BPMs, what happens is like you'll write that same process and you'll get it done, but then the intelligent side comes in and says, hey, what's that critical path of that BPM? Like what's that process of critical path? And then it says, great, I know what that is. Here's a test script so that you can, that's already ready to go, that you can go and automate. So they're basically building in quality checks within itself that you can just instantly take and run with it and say, I can run this ahead of time. Is this process going to work? Yes, because I have this automated test, and then run the process. And so that takes a lot of the headache and some of the quick wins for automation, because sometimes you'll hear some parts that like, oh, bots aren't, they can be brittle, and it all really depends on how they're built out. But these kind of tests make it to where when something's going to run, and you're already preemptively really striking against those things, so you're ready to go. So that's one example. Another example is in general, kind of where automation is being seen to go is, and now that we're going to move into more intelligent automation and moving down that path, we're starting to see more composability. And so composability is definitely coming up. There's a few companies that do it right now, and composability makes it to where it's really the neat interaction of, or intersection really, of like APIs. So like the coding that works in the background of all the apps nowadays, everything kind of talks to one another, and this background language then sets it to where all these other information can actually be intertwined. And so now that that's happening, composability is coming up to where, instead of using bots for everything or a process for everything, your apps can talk and cause triggers to work as well, to where those automations can run after something else is run. It's really interesting how it works, and like I said, it's something that's coming up. It's already out in regards to a lot. There are a few companies that are actually using it, and it is neat to see where it's going to happen and go next.
Do you see augmented reality, virtual reality, metaverse, okay, at some point taking bigger role, bigger stage? Because I know what many skeptics are saying out there, okay, for day-to-day business operations, right? For
Yeah.
again, companies' bottom line, maybe it's a little futuristic. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think there was a news story today that a company forces, or not really forces, but asks like all of their employees to start in the metaverse. That all their meetings are very metaverse driven, and I think a lot more companies are going to be moving to something like that. It's a space that is still new, and with any new, technology or process or the way things work, it takes time to see, what kind of automations can be there, what kind of stability, what kind of architecture can be input and put in place to really see like how far they can take it, and to mitigate any kind of like issues or streamlining or just overall bandwidth, right? So you right now, a lot of games are we're getting to the point where like your AAA gaming is very apparent and can happen in the VR space, but it also takes a lot of energy, right? So then sometimes to get the best games, you still have to use a computer and kind of offset some of the graphics capabilities. But overall, like it's moving there. And when it comes down to meeting people, it's very easy to do. You have like your avatars. You can even get into like NFTs coming up to where like you can buy them, and then you become that NFT, or that avatar has like the certain clothing or has the picture that's involved or whatnot. So yeah, it's a growing space. It's one of those things. What it's definitely going to be seen in the future, and we'll see kind of where that grows out.
So I cannot talk about technology or any kind of modern professional world without asking my guests, how do you see professions developing? Okay, where do you see the future for those who stepping in into the working world, right? And if they don't have technical background, how can they find themselves if they inspired by one of our talks, perhaps?
Yeah, I think one thing to talk about is that a lot of companies, this is automation, AI. These are all new spaces. Same thing with like metaverse, right? So it's all new spaces. Companies are moving into this. Companies said, are looking at the landscape and saying, hey, how can I be more effective? How can I drive more business, especially if something were to happen, like some kind of calamity, or we need to pivot to a certain way. Like, how do we do that fast? And so companies are looking at it, and they're seeing that automation is helping with that. So automation can help do that, and when you have that, then we can talk about like the AI thing again, right? But all of those are driving effective use of business and effective use of business data. So where it's like again, it's like more data driven, it's innovative. So that being the driver, there's also businesses. These same businesses are kind of scared in a way because they don't know where to start, and then they don't know who to get in. So their first thought is, "Hey, I need some developer that has 10 years experience doing this stuff." And then what you find out is that you don't always need that. You may want your senior developer to be very seasoned and understand different aspects, but in the world of automation and even the world of AI, there's a lot of retraining that even myself, of like having 20 years of IT experience, I had to relearn how to kind of handle certain IT aspects in the automation sense, because it's different. It's different. There's different aspects. There's different perspectives, and so you have to really drive what that looks like, and you have to see how you to integrate to make sure you have the most. At the end of the day, you're beholden to your stakeholders and make sure everything's working and you're getting that return on investment. But in general, talking about developers and some of your entry level roles, I've literally hired people out of college, like right out of college, and they've done just fine. So if you're clientele and they're in college and they're like, hey, I want to go into computers, that's great. Do that, because that is the future. Everything's very digital and everything's moving to digital transformations and whatnot. But then also, like, if you see the same kind of thing that we're talking about here and you want to get into automation, it's not a hard, you know, ask to come from right out of college to get an entry level developer role and to kind of move with that. And the pay should be better than working at the local, mom and pop or gas stations.
I've seen examples of really successful boot camps,
Mhm.
okay, which help some frustrated college graduates to narrow down a little bit their interest, and
Yeah.
they get these specific skills. How narrow, again, I'm just pounding the topic, how narrow, let's say, RPA specialist needs to be, or I would say automation developer, or is it enough, because you mentioned the valuable point that you hire people out of college with what background?
Yeah, I mean, if you're asking about like the overall specialist, I mean, RPA in general, like, and automation is still like new. We talked about that, but overall, to be like an expert or to be someone like a knowledge leader in the space takes more, because you have to have an understanding not only of the overall automation scope and feeling and kind of what's going on and how to mitigate the day-to-day blockers, and where's your governance and how you're going to define and really scope out your stuff. You have to also look at from the C-suite side and all of your leadership to say, like, how are we doing this as a company to really drive that effort. And so usually, a lot of companies, when they look to bring on automation, they're either going to go a few different ways. One of it's either they bring on their own team, or they bring on like a hybrid team, or they really look just to have a vendor kind of do it all. And so all of those can work. And even then, all of those can change at any point in time. Like if you were to bring on, just have vendors provide the overall push for automation and really drive that through the business, and get the BPM and get all that driven and get all the processes documented and whatnot, that could work. And then maybe after a while, you hire on your own team to really kind of just control it and really control that, the overall effort, so you don't lose anything in translation, or you don't lose anything of just like tribal knowledge and team knowledge. Like, you're making sure that your COE, your center of excellence that you're using to create this, to really drive the enterprise and drive the organization, maintains that understanding, maintains like that knowledge, so that you can go even further. Like, because without knowing what's in the organization, you're not going to have all the visibility you need to be able to really make impactful change.
Thank you so much, Doug, for your time. Thank you. In conclusion, why don't we leave our audiences with few takeaways? Okay, just to summarize, because we did touch on technology, on cultural changes, on organizational needs, right? Even professions that will be required, right, to drive forward automation efforts. Automation 2022, what do you think is exciting? What do you think is practical?
I mean, I think the exciting thing. So a lot of younger audiences, a lot of people are looking at disrupting different organizations and cultural standpoints, like Uber did with like taxis and whatnot. So something to look towards, like being disrupted, and something that at least I'm working towards is like the healthcare side. And so healthcare, health science is something that hasn't had a lot of changes or very fast changes. It does change over time because we get better and better at the technology we use. But with IoT and automation and AI really coming into the stance here, we're starting to see a very big push for all of that to be changed. And so it's a matter of how and when, but talks are happening, things are moving, and it looks really good because, especially with automation, you have the ability of these bot processes that can do and mimic what humans can do, in regards to, like, computers and sending information to one thing to another, or building reports and whatnot. The main, or like the great thing about that is, like, the bots don't see the data. Like, they see it, but like they're not going to report back, or they're not going to see data and then go, hey, I'm going to go buy some stock in this thing because I see something I shouldn't see, whereas a human could do that. So really, like, the quality of the data that all of us use every day or see every day is going to be raised, and so it's going to be better. It's going to be more usable, more friendly, and with the data that we're getting, we get more insights, and the more insights we get, the better we can actually use data driven development to make better decisions. And so really, at the end of the day, like, we're all going to be making better decisions. We're going to be getting better key insights, and out of those insights, we're potentially going to be healthier, or know when something is happening that could be potentially unhealthy, that we can at least make a decision on. So the best thing about it is just knowing what's out there and having the ability to make a difference, or understand what your options are to make that difference.
Thank you. Thank you, Doug, so very much. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.